Good. All right, good afternoon and welcome to our March 7th Early Childhood Advisory Committee meeting. We're having a little technical difficulties, so we'll ask the participants that's on Zoom, if you're unable to unmute, if you could use the chat feature throughout the meeting today. We will begin with our attendance. Also for our participants on Zoom, in your attendance, if you could please state your location and your reason for virtual attendance. And you can use the guidance that was sent in the email to make that report.
Ms. Suarez?
Present.
Ms. Parrish?
Here.
Mr. Anders?
Here.
Ms. Mormon?
Here.
Dr. Johnson? Ms. Alsop?
Here.
Ms. Franklin?
Present.
Ms. Langford? Mr. Turner? Dr. Wolford?
Here.
Ms. McMahon?
Here.
Ms. Howard?
Here virtually from my office due to medical reasons.
Dr. Shreepian? Dr. Steen?
Present from Fairfax, Virginia, more than 60 miles.
Dr. Nelson?
I'm present on Zoom. I'm in Richmond, but I'm on service in the newborn nursery, so needed to stay in the hospital in case of an emergency.
That seems valid. Ms. Wilberger?
Here.
Ms. Lipscomb? Ms. McCartney?
Here.
And Ms. Ward?
I'm here virtually from my home office. I had a scheduling conflict, another mandatory meeting that butted up right against this one.
Thank you. And Madam Chair, we have a quorum.
Thank you. Before we go into the agenda and the approval of the minutes, we do want to take a moment and go around and do some introductions and then just a roll call. But if you could introduce yourself, we do have some new members that we've had the opportunity to meet virtually at our last meeting. But now that we do have majority of us in person, if we could do a brief introduction with your name and maybe what sector you represent here on the Ecac. And so I'll start with myself, Shaiki Franklin. I'm a Head Start and Early Head Start Director. And so obviously I represent Head Start non-school division.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jenna Conway. I'm the Deputy Superintendent for Early Childhood Care and Education. I serve as the department's point. And also make sure that we ask all the department team members to introduce themselves too. We keep getting bigger and bigger in order to better support you all. So I want to know who they are, what their roles are. With that, I'll turn it to you.
Jeff Williams, I oversee the Office of Child Care Health.
I'm Jennifer Parrish, Executive Director for Peak Childhood Center, so I'm representing public centers.
I'm Vivian McMahon. I'm with United Way of Southampton Roads, and I'm here for advocacy.
Hi, everyone. Sandy Wilberger. I'm here with the Partnership with People with Disabilities, the VCU Training and Technical Assistance Center, otherwise known as TTAC. And my role is to represent disability and advocacy.
Good afternoon, Cecilia Suarez from Creative and School Private Area. I hope to represent all the private daycares.
Gina Wolford, Northern City Schools, Special Pre-K, and Mountain Park Community College. Also teach some early childhood classes there.
Good afternoon, Cheryl Mormon, Family Day Home Provider in North Chesterfield, also representing Family Day Homes.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Becca Ulrich. I'm the Executive Director for Early Childhood Access, Enrollment, and Policy. So my team oversees strategies to increase access across the system and specifically oversees the Child Care Subsidy Program.
Good afternoon. I'm Aaliyah Lewis McKinley, Early Childhood Policy Analyst in the Office of Early Childhood Access and Enrollment and support within the work of increasing access and work a lot with our federal reporting.
Hi, everybody. Alex McPherson, Associate Director of Enrollment in our Office of Early Childhood Access and Enrollment.
Good afternoon. I'm Erin Carroll, Assistant Superintendent of Early Childhood. I work with several of our offices, classroom learning, quality, data, and our really great team.
Hi, everyone. Maria Monica Sarro. I'm the Associate Director of the Office of Early Childhood Learning.
I'm Tiara West. I'm the Associate Director of Early Childhood Data Systems, so I oversee our. Good afternoon. I'm Chris Myers. I'm the Director of Quality Measurement Improvement and oversee the APD project.
Good afternoon. I'm Tina Alsop from Henrico County Public Schools, and I represent Head Start within the school division.
Hi, I'm Helen Murphy from Harrisonburg, Virginia, and I represent Virginia Partnership for Out of School Time in the nonprofit area, formerly of Jane.
Although that, we're so glad to have you, although we used to have the distance between Norton and the Eastern Shore, it was truly the furthest number of hours you could get, so Harrisonburg and North not quite that far apart.
I don't know how many in-person meetings I'll make them.
Thank you.
I'm Clark Andrews. I am Rivers Bend Children's Center and representing state licensed nonprofit, host a for-profit.
Oh, hello everyone. I'm Lucy Metzger. I'm a quality improvement specialist, and I work supporting the APD efforts.
On these, yes.
Dr. Nelson, why don't we start with you?
Sure. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Bergen Nelson. I'm a pediatrician at Children's Hospital of Richmond, and I am here representing the Virginia chapter of the American Academy of Pediatrics.
And Dr. Steen, I'm just going to call on members, and then we'll jump over to ex officio.
Hi, I'm Dr. Boikia Steen. I'm an associate professor at George Mason University in early childhood education.
And Angela?
Hi, I'm Angela Wirt. I'm the Executive Director of Child Care Aware Virginia, and I represent the Child Care Resource and Referral Network for Virginia.
And Michelle?
Hi, Michelle Smith-Howard, CEO of Kids First Years in Alexandria, Virginia, and representing nonprofit ECE organizations.
All right, I think that that's all of our voting members. So we'll jump over to ex officio. Jennifer, do you want to start?
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Jen McDonald. I am the Director of the Division of Child and Family Health here in the Office of Family Health Services, and I am representing VDH.
Amanda?
Good afternoon, everyone. Amanda Kay. I am the Child Care Subsidy Program Manager here with Virginia Department of Social Services.
Elizabeth White.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Elizabeth White. I am the Assistant Secretary in the Office of the Secretary of Health and Human Resources.
Thank you. Tondua Jeffries.
Good afternoon, Tondua Jeffries. I'm the Executive Director of the Head Start State Collaboration Office at DOE.
And Tracy, last but not least.
Hi, guys. I'm Tracy Walters. I'm the State Coordinator for Infant and Early Childhood Mental Health out of the Office of Child and Family Services at DBHDS.
Thank you.
Thank you all for allowing us those few minutes to do introductions. And again, I'm glad you all are here, that's able to be present, and thank you all for joining in on Zoom as well. We have nice packets this time. So you have a copy of the minutes, your packets online, your information is also emailed. Do we have a motion to approve the February minutes?
I just have one correction. This lists me, Colleen McCartney, as being from Richmond, and I'm Harrisonburg.
We will make that correction.
Any other corrections? Hearing none, do we have a motion?
I make a motion, Tina Alsop, for accepting the minutes with the correction noted.
Second.
I second, sure.
Motion's been made by Tina, second by Cheryl. Any further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? Ayes have it, motion is carried. The 2024 Ecac meeting schedule update, I should have received an email regarding changes to our meeting schedule. Our June 13th meeting is canceled. And Aaliyah also asked that if you would, if you haven't already, do the survey for May meeting. I believe that date's May 23rd or May 22nd. With 2 time frames to choose from. So, Aaliyah, do you want to say anything else about?
Yes, if you all could complete that survey by the EOD tomorrow, I'll send a reminder email today or early tomorrow morning, just to remind you all, but please just let us know as soon as possible your availability on the 2 dates. I believe the times are 10 to 1 and 11 to 2. Yeah, so you could just do that for us, that would be greatly appreciated, so we can get that on the calendar. Thank you.
And just remember that we certainly need a quorum for that meeting, as we have some very exciting business to take care of at that meeting. All right, at this time, I will turn it over for updates.
Wonderful, thank you, Shaiki, and welcome again to our new members. For our newer folks, just as a reminder, we have 2 types of items that we handle at the Early Childhood Advisory Committee. There are updates in which we do not need to vote on, but we think these are key strategic processes, events that you would want to know about as broadly as the Early Childhood Advisory body that advises the Board of Education. And then there are presentation items, and following the presentation item, that's where you need a vote and an endorsement. And either the endorsement as is, or we'll oftentimes endorsement with recommendations for changes. We have a 3 updates, information mostly relates to health and safety, and then a longer presentation on our updated 24-25 Virginia Quality Work-Defined guidelines. So let's jump into the updates first. So the first key update is just more information on a law that was passed last year, or 2 years ago rather, and then updated related to requiring all child day centers to have epinephrine available in the case of situation where a child may not have yet been diagnosed with an allergy. So we just wanted to make sure that folks were aware. The law has been passed, and so when we bring regulations to this body for endorsement, that's in cases where it hasn't, our actions have not been precisely prescribed by the law. In cases where our actions as a Department of Education have already been prescribed by the law, what we do is we update you on what is happening. So we were then required by law to update the regulation to align with the law. That affected the following, as you see here, 4 chapters related to the standards for licensed day centers, child day program requirements for subsidy, family day homes, and voluntarily registered family day homes. We are still working on the kind of the document regulation. And so in this case, the law says that, centers must have EpiPens in the case of allergy, but as you might imagine, there's a ton of questions about, well, what does that actually look like? And how would that be enforced? And that's where the regulations would come in. We wanted to update you today that we're still working on those. We've also worked very closely in partnership with the Department of Health. That is the entity that would have to do the generic prescriptions. But this is a status update to say we're still working on the regulations, which have to be certified by the Office of Attorney General, and that we would release that and provide extensive technical assistance to the field upon the release of those regulations. So still no enforcement at this point in time, right? You've got to have regulations first, know that law is out there, know that we are working very diligently with the Department of Health and the Office of the Attorney General on that, and that more information will come before we expect to have that in place. Let me pause there and see if there's any questions about that update. My question was going to be how soon are we expecting to implement, but you answered that question. So thank you for clarifying that.
My question, there may not be an answer to, maybe it's just a comment to share with the group, but has any General Assembly members engaged in any of these conversations? I know this is a long line of years ago, but it's put DOE in a really tough place to do something they're not capable of doing like that, and it's put 90,000 for childcare centers who are operating illegally every day by state law, but very much appreciated. The DOE is not forcing it. Is General Assembly here? Are they? And I know the law passed unanimously on both sides, so it was false. But they enacted a law can't be abided by.
I think the key thing to Clark's question is we have made sure that we've been transparent with the General Assembly is that sort of work is well underway. And I think that there's sort of generally an understanding a law is passed, a law has an enactment clause, but then sometimes there are steps that need to be taken. I think there's an understanding that because it involves potential medications for small children, that there has been some grace around really working closely with the Department of Health first to kind of get the appropriate guidance, the information out there. This is, I think if it were a law that didn't involve such complexity, maybe they would have a different set of expectations, but I think making sure that we get this right in terms of what it would actually mean to administer epinephrine to a child who didn't yet have a diagnosis, I think is what has led to some of the additional sensitivity. I also think, although it's called Elijah's Law in other places, although it has passed in other states, I still think that states have taken a slightly different approach on how to think about this. Largely because the sort of unknowns are pretty significant, right? Like you can have a scenario in which you are aware that a child has an allergy, right? And you sort of treat it immediately. There have not been as many scenarios where you assume a child has an allergy, but don't know that and sort of administer epinephrine. And so I think really trying to kind of get the right health expertise in place, consult the attorneys to make sure we're complying with the law and then get it implemented is taking longer, I think, than anybody expected. But I think we've tried to say we're diligently working on it, and that the reason we are proceeding carefully is because this is a relatively sort of a new practice in the health space and childcare space.
And I think the law tells DOE what to do. So no one in here is breaking the law.
Okay.
So the law says the board shall amend its regulations. So, in its wisdom, the General Assembly didn't say within 2 weeks or anything like that. The regulatory process takes a long time. That's one of the things we're navigating with the Attorney General's office is what does that mean? So not that it makes anybody necessarily feel better or worse, we are technically within the law of modifying regulations, but no provider is breaking the law right now.
They don't know that. So that's good to hear. Yeah, sure.
Yep. So the code section, we can talk more afterwards, unless you want me to read the code section, but it's basically the board shall amend its regulations, ...
Sure.
So no providers right now, breaking the law. So it's probably good to hear that coming from licensing, right?
Not this one, you.
Right.
All right, let's go ahead and move. Okay, next update is wanted. This is a preface to our exciting May meeting. We are not going, unless we get requested privately to do a fire drill again. We're gonna necessarily get that going wall. For those of you who are new, the last time we discussed at length, we had a fire drill and we walked out, all 22 lights. So luckily we're almost burst back to the elevator, but it was sore. Next day, probably didn't head into the weekend. But we it's like a year, a century ago. But we did, as a reminder of where we are in this process, we prepared the draft regulations after engaging for the greater part of a year and change with the work group, including members from this body. We put the regulations out there very early at the NORA, or the Notice of Intended Regulatory Action stage, largely so folks could know sort of directionally where we were going. That doesn't mean that the board approved regulations as is. That just meant that this sort of, because often you read the NORA template, it doesn't really sort of tell you the detail, doesn't provide the kind of in the weeds information that you need to know to be able to comment on it. So we added that. The NORA went through. We have public comment. The NORA was posted, and that public comment ended at the end of January. We've already received just over 240 comments related to the regulation. Jeff and the Office of Child Care Health and Safety are currently reviewing all of the comments, looking at kind of different buckets that came up: policies and procedures, qualifications, safe sleep, playground use, hand washing, my favorite, reptiles and other pets, and the Dr. Center. Actually, my favorite is with Dr. Nelson, and we talked about political seats. That is absolutely my favorite part. Don't eat a full meal before our CDC discussion. But what we want to kind of go through these comments and be able to share with this body as we go back through the CDC regulations and talk about how we've responded to the public comments so far. Go to the next slide. So what would happen now is we would like to take the actual regulations to the board in June. So we took what we put out there with the NORA. We got public comment on that. We will sort of take those public comments, make a set of updates to the regulations. We will bring the regulations to this body in May, seeking again an endorsement or endorsement recommendations, and then it would go to the Board of Education in June. That is where we are in the status. Again, this is why Aaliyah is sharing with the kind of earlier start. Our goal, and you were right on this last time, we came almost around time, but we typically start earlier so that for some reason there's a lengthier conversation. So you heard me just right before we made this mistake in Louisiana, and we were there till 9 o'clock at night. So we start earlier when we're discussing the Child Day Center regulations. We want to get that information to Aaliyah by the end of the day tomorrow, so we can get that May meeting set up. And our goal would be to get through the entirety of the updated or revised regulations, and then take them to the board in June, as well as write an overview to the board about the best practices and health and safety regulations, and to understand it, which is really now a 2.5-year process to get to this point. We would then take it back, yes, it'll work twice, so for June and July, and then it would go through what Jeff described a moment ago, the kind of various steps that once it's been approved by a board, it has to go to the Office of the Attorney General, the Secretary's Office, Department of Planning and Budget, the Office of Regulatory Management, and the Governor's legal counsel, and then we will provide a significant amount of technical assistance, including webinars and information to walk the field through all of the changes. Let's finish that. We're coming for you, Cheryl. I'm just kidding. This is over again for Family Day. This is just part of that. We wanted to make sure everybody was aware of where we are. I know it's a flashback to last year's very long meeting in 24th floor Exodus, but hopefully we'll not have that fun this time. But it will be important that we'll work very closely with Becca and Aaliyah and Jeff and team to make sure we get that out. A bit longer document, Get that out with plenty of time for you to read and engage your constituents, the various groups that you represent in preparation for that meeting. Any questions about the CDC process? All right. Speaking of code and other updates, go to the next slide, please. So this is again, we have a scenario where yet again, we were working to the code was language added to the code in 2020. The goal here of preventing early childhood lead exposure. So the law requires child day programs and exempt programs, sort of preschool children to develop and implement a plan to test drinking water. This must be submitted to the Department of Health, the Office of Drinking Water. And then if the results indicate that there are elevated lead levels, that the program needs to remediate, retest, and resubmit the results. If there is sort of prohibitive cost or there is a desire to not do testing and remediation, programs have an alternative, which is using bottled water that meets the FDA standards for bottled water. And the sort of implementation on this has been delayed since 2020, but is now we're kind of at a place where we start to go into effect. Next slide, please. And Jeff will be able to answer more questions, clarification on this, but this is one of those, again, sort of similar to the work with epinephrine is in partnership with our colleagues at Health. So we do not send us any water, do not send us any test results. We do not have the capacity to do that. I didn't know people confident in water in this building. So VDH will be in charge. I think Jennifer McDonald would say don't send her water either. That's another office VDH, but VDH will be responsible for tracking and monitoring the samples of the remediation, and VDU will just make sure that everybody's in compliance. So we know this is about 4,600 programs across the state, mostly licensed, then a handful of religious exempt programs, certified preschool. The Department of Health has funding for up to 25,000 samples that must be obligated before September 1st. So the grant funding is available to licensed programs and public schools. Funding is prioritized by demographics, like anything that's sort of outside funding. There's always a set of criteria, strings attached to that. And the testing typically costs about $65 per box of 30 tests. So wanting to make sure, and we'll continue to use this forum as well as Readiness Connections and all of the various channels that the Office of Child Care, Health and Safety has to get out to the field, but really making sure that providers are aware that this law was passed, and now we are at that point of implementation, and it's important that folks test their water, making sure that folks are aware of this resource, this time-limited resource in terms of the grant-funded tests from the Department of Health, and then making sure that we are providing extensive awareness, right? Making sure you're aware, and then technical assistance on how to do this, or to make the results, who to send it to. Our goal right now is to get folks to be compliant by the beginning of 2025. So progress. Recognizing feedback. So again, this is a place where, to kind of Jeff's point earlier, doing our due diligence to make sure that state laws are being followed, but also, looking for resources like the grant funding to make this more affordable and accessible for programs, and providing a thoughtful, gradual rollout, accompanied with technical assistance to support everyone. Questions?
Yep. So programs can contact their local PDH for posting.
I would not recommend that because locals aren't going to know the information we're going to send out here in the next month to start to outline that process. The delay mostly had to do with the health department getting ready for this in this specific instance.
So if you don't send your, this is probably too technical, but if you don't send your water sample to BD, like use a private company to run the testing, then you just send your data to whoever is collected. needs to see you.
It's a little bit more in the weeds than I'm comfortable to answer off the top of my head. I don't.
But all that will be in the reference.
Okay, right, yes.
And keep in mind, you're probably talking samples, lots of samples.
Oh, yes, no, it's
Every water source in the building, not just drinkable, including irrigation. So, I'm 37 samples at my two schools.
All right, so now we're shifting into an actual presentation item. And typically with a presentation item, we provide greater information about the why this matters for Virginia kids and families, as well as additional data. The item that we're actually asking you to endorse, this, I love it that Chicky loves the packet, is this old thing. Just a little bit of information on BQB5 that has grown and grown and grown over time. But in all seriousness, these are our proposed Virginia Quality Birth to 5 BQB5 guidelines, and the half an inch here or quarter inch here is really a testament to extraordinary work done by our publicly funded providers across Head Start, early Head Start, private centers, nonprofit centers, our school-based programs, our early childhood special education, to put in place a quality measurement and improvement system that truly is shared, and everything else, for sure, that is truly shared statewide. And so I couldn't be more excited to present this alongside with folks like Chris and Tiara and Lucy, and Melissa, and others who have helped, along with our partners at the Early Childhood Foundation and our many regions, to make this happen. Before we delve into the many pages here, I wanted to kind of take a step back and talk about why this matters. You know, you're going to hear from me, you're going to hear about, you know, our fundamental belief that all kids in the Commonwealth should have the opportunity to come to school ready. And the driving force behind BQB5 and the Unification Law in 2020 was that kids are served, parents prefer a variety of settings. It doesn't matter the name on the outside of the building or the funding source. It doesn't matter if you're in a toddler or preschool. But we need to think about this as a system, from our family day homes in our rural and urban areas, our centers that are working in English or in other languages, from our for-profit or supposed to be for-profit centers to our early Head Start and Head Starts, to our schools, to our inclusionary classrooms and our early child special education program. We need to be inclusive of all of the settings that are providing and supporting intentional learning development in kids, right? And so, but also know that we have a true north, right, about improving interactions for all kids, working very closely with leaders and educators. We want to take this information, we want to put it at families, right, as our children's first and most important educators' fingertips, so that we have a system that is driving higher quality interactions, better outcomes and learning development for kids, and ultimately we see the results across our 95,000 whole kindergartners who come to school each year, who are fully prepared to be successful. We continue to look at the Virginia data, and the Virginia data continues to show us that if we can get kids to come in ready or more ready, it makes a huge difference. It makes a huge difference in their ability to be successful in that kindergarten classroom, not just the letters and the numbers, but the social emotional behaviors, right, around attention and managing all those feelings and those, you know, wiggly bodies. It makes a difference in terms of reading on level by third grade, which is Superintendent Walford and others can attest, makes all the difference, right, in being able to be successful in school, and we see the results beyond. I'm at a unique vantage point right now. I have a kindergartner, I have a third grader, I have a fifth grader, and you can see the difference that it makes. And I will certainly say, particularly for my daughter's third grade classroom, the kids who can read and are feeling successful like school significantly more than those who already feel belong behind, and they're only 8 years old, right? And so really our concerted effort to raise the ceiling, raise the floor across the incredible array of publicly funded providers is just so important. here's our theory of change, right? Which is that we want to have a true north around what we expect, and that this is something that site leader, educator, and parent can agree on. This is what kids should have. We need to measure that consistently across the board, specifically measuring teacher-child interactions and use of high-quality curriculum. And then we need to sort of focus. You rarely hear me say the term rating system, because this is much more than that. And you often hear me say measurement and improvement, and it's a lot. It's not easy to say. I can only imagine Cecilia saying it in Spanish, but like it's a lot. Every time it's measurement and improvement, and we really want to make sure that the emphasis is as much on improvement it is on the act of measuring what our kids are experiencing. Next slide, please. These are our guiding principles. We think it's important, right, as whether you think about the many pages here, or just even the experiences that you all have had as publicly funded providers over the last few years, making sure that this is about kids and improved school readiness for kids, making sure that we are really focused on growth. This is not a system that is intended to say, let me put it this way, everybody who's part of this system works very, very hard. As Clark alluded to early, everybody is undercompensated, right? Nobody's in this for the money, and we would not want a system that sort of says that some folks are no good. Instead, we want to really focus on understanding where folks need support, and we want to sort of encourage and incentivize growth over time, right? There's nothing more powerful than that. We know we've got to give good information. We know we've got to provide support, resources, and incentives for improvement. We've got to be able to do something that's affordable for providers. The history of measurement and improvement has often been you have to go purchase a degree functionally, right? Or be able to have enough to compensate somebody with a high level degree. That's not affordable for over half of our systems. We've got something that's got to be fair and affordable, scalable for use in 3,000 plus sites, 11,000 classrooms, and ultimately serve as a resource for families. So you see that kind of throughout our work here. So very exciting. We're midway through the next slide, Aaliyah. We're midway through the first full year of BQP5 full implementation. It started a little pilot in 2019 where it was a little hectic in the beginning and we weren't really sure what we were building or what we were measuring or quite frankly what we were doing. And now we are at full statewide scale. In between 2019 and this year, there was a little pandemic that we also survived, and noting how hard that the early childhood sector was affected by this. But as we look into the spring of this first full year of implementation, we're very pleased to share with you these successes. So first of all is 100% of publicly funded programs are participating in BQP5. And this was a year over year, folks wondered, could we do that? Could we make it happen? And everybody has come together. Huge thanks to the associations, to the Ready regions, to the partners who built the relationships and get to bring everybody to the table. Nearly 17,000 educators are eligible and receiving financial support to recognize B5. So what was a small pilot in 2019 is now serving 17,000 childcare or family day home or Head Start educators across the state. 99%, and it was close call. There was a dry erase board outside of Chris's office that was a countdown, second only to the Times Square countdown calendar on New Year's Eve that Chris and team had to kind of track the observations, but really excited to work so closely with Ready Regions, with our publicly funded providers across the state to get all of those observations done. And we have seen a significant increase even through the practice years. Nearly 80% of sites are now reporting use of quality curriculum. These are huge gains for childcare centers and family day homes. Before that, Head Start and BPI, for the most part, it's already been required to use curriculum, but it was these huge gains for childcare centers and family day homes. We're getting all of these observations, so 13,000. Let me say that again. That's an extra zero. I was just sharing somebody nationally, like, I think an extra zero in that presentation. I was like, oh no, it's 13,000. Local and external class observations last fall are already supporting improvement. One of my favorite stories is when I was at Clark's Center and for an event with the governor, and one of his veteran extraordinary teachers was sitting talking with me, and she started off letting me know how skeptical she was about the class. I was like, oh, The governor was at least 20 minutes away. I was like, oh, this would be a long sit. Yeah. But then proceeded to walk through, even as a veteran teacher, even as somebody who already had sort of had a very developed set of skills, talk with me about how she appreciated the class and things that it helped her get better at, and the way it really focused in on behaviors that were changeable. She said, I'm not going to go off and get another degree. I'm too old for that. But but this was truly a tool that helped me get better at my practice. And I've heard that from educators across the state in terms of being able to receive that feedback. And no offense to our dear colleagues in health and safety, but that it's more than just health and safety, right? They're like, I got the licensing feedback, but I didn't necessarily know how my practice in terms of supporting the learning development of young children was really sort of where it was working, where I was very strong, and where I could improve. We have 60 plus, thanks to the work of Marie and team, 60 plus approved curriculum, meaning truly curriculum is a choice, including multiple free or low cost options. That's something that we know curriculum can be very expensive, particularly if you have to buy multiple kits or packets, and so making that more available. And then we know that we're even this year starting to use our information to say who needs the most support. And it's a little bit of a different approach around sort of saying, okay, here are some professional development resources, available. Those are great, but oftentimes the very same programs that have the most wherewithal are also the ones who partake of the professional development. And we've shifted the paradigm and saying who, based on those class scores and that use of curriculum, is in need of the most support, and how do we prioritize those, knowing again that any of our programs that take public dollars are by design serving our most vulnerable kids and families. And then we've been working, thanks to the work of Tiara and team, on figuring out how we would post this information. We've been very sensitive, knock on wood, 2 years of practice results. We did everything we could. We worked very closely with you all and many regions to make sure that information stayed private right at the site level. But we do, according to law, have to make that public for families this fall. And so working very closely with many regions and partners across the state to talk about what that would look like and how to best support that. So just a few things this year we've succeeded at. Okay, with that, what I'm going to go now is go into the guidelines. The good news for everybody, in addition to the fact we're not going to have any drills, we had a tornado drill this morning, is that we don't need to go through all of the sections, because a lot of this, based on the feedback you've given us over the course of the last 12 months since we met to review the guidelines for 23-24, have remained the same. So what we'll focus on in the next bit is what has changed and kind of getting you to weigh in on what has changed. So don't worry, we're not, unlike CDC regs, we can go section by section. We will only focus this conversation on those things that are changing. Next slide, please. So a couple of the key updates. So at first on that far column, it includes what the update is. The middle column is the kind of rationale, the why behind the change, and then the final column is where you can find that in the guidelines. So I'm going to do a quick just sort of walk through each, but then we've got detail on it. So I'm not gonna, I'll kind of wait till we get into each slides. But there are five kind of key updates that you find throughout the revised guidelines. The first is working very closely with the field to make sure we can understand what kids are experiencing and tracking over time. Talk more about that in a moment. The second is some additional clarity on selecting the right class tool. Talk about that. The third is continue to expand support for school replacement and our effort to have consistency and accuracy statewide across the 30,000 plus class observations that we do. Number four is going from a opt-in site improvement planning to required site improvement planning for a need support site. So again, one of the goals, one of the values that we hold dear is saying who needs the most support, where there are places where none of us would be comfortable in terms of the interactions that kids are having, and how do we make sure that those programs are participating in a process that improves interactions. And then finally, just talking a little bit more about the information about what will go online this fall, so that we're all clear and have the same shared understanding of what that looks like. All right, so let's jump into each of these. So the first one is classroom lists. So at a high level, we've had the technology has been part of Link B5 for years to be able to add information about which kids are in the classroom. The shift that we are proposing for the guidelines going forward is to require all of our programs to provide information about the kids that are assigned to the classrooms. Let me explain the kind of the rationale behind this. First, the law says that we have to make sure that our VQB5 system is indicative or supports child outcomes, right? And so figuring out how do we get that information, and we as a department are not allowed to capture, right, kind of gather information unless there's kind of legal authority to do so. So it starts with the law. I think it goes further than that in terms of being able to understand how kids' experiences then track with future outcomes. And so Virginia is unique in having built Link B5. We think it's the nation's only early childhood data system that captures information down to the classroom level. And we already know about class scores. We know about which educators are assigned to those classrooms. We know the turnover rate of those educators, the compensation, the credentials, and the highest degree of education of those educators. We know what curriculum is being used, but we don't necessarily fully know which kids are in which classrooms getting those experiences, and then how do those kids do over time. And this is really the kind of the missing link, is to capture that information. First and foremost, because we are a Department of Ed and we're subject to multiple privacy laws and regulations, all of this would be done in a way that is entirely safe for kid data. We have to, whether it's capturing the information about the kind of child assessment or any other child level data, we're incredibly careful about that. But we need to be able to understand what kids are in what classrooms having what experiences, and then we can match that with, okay, we know that it turns out that, this is a curriculum that really supports kids' learning and development. It turns out that if we can compensate teachers better, we can get lower turnover and kids learn more, right? Like those sorts of findings are going to be essential to understanding how VQB5 supports outcomes. Yes, do we have all the VQB5 data? The VKRP data about kind of how kids do coming into kindergarten? We do, but we can't really sort that out, right? And we have some data about what program they were in, but we spent 5 years building up a system that sort of says the classroom, right, what the kid experiences in the classroom is the most important factor. And so we have to be able to sort of disaggregate all the information about the kids coming into kindergarten and understand what were their experiences in infant, what were their experiences as a toddler, what were their experiences in preschool, in order to better support the system. To make sure that we're improving experiences that actually promote kids' learning and development. So this is a little bit of detail about this requirement, again, required by law, but when you hear us talk about it, you'll hear us sort of talk about the broader purpose in addition just to the legal mandate. It will all be in Link B5. It will all be kind of part of a broader system that already has kid data as it relates to VKRP and the Regional Literacy Screener. And there will be an opt-out. So, particularly for our parents who are not publicly funded, who want to opt out, there will be an opt-out process. We want to have as many of our both publicly funded and non-publicly funded kids information as possible, because we think that will help present the fullest picture about what kids are experiencing. That will include the broadest diversity of children. And that's really important in terms of what the law says the system should do, but we also recognize that for individual reasons, parents may want to opt out. So what this means for sites in 24-25 is that they'll use Link B5 to enter the enrollment information by December. It'll be kind of a slightly longer time. We're not going to try to squish that onto registration. The ready regions, as they've supported everybody last year to get registered and get the classroom observations done, we'll provide reminders, technical assistance, and support. We will capture all of the information from our public schools. We capture that already through the data entered. So they're not exempt from this requirement. We just capture it in a slightly different way. And we'll continue to sort of work very closely with all of our providers on what is the best way to get this information in. But we think this is really important in order to fully comply with the law and ultimately, I think, really to show the incredible work that's happening in our programs and the impact that it has on kids. Next slide, please. So this, and then I'll talk about. So this is kind of, again, why this is so valuable. We can take information about children, de-identify that information, and do a probabilistic match that allows us, even if we don't have that little text identifier at the outset, that can allow us to connect what kids experience early on to all of these different outcomes, to sort of your school readiness, to how well you do on the literacy screener, to your third grade results, to how you do in high school, whether you graduate or not, and then even with using the longitudinal data system, higher education participation, workforce involvement, and even whether or not down the road you are participating in various public assistance programs. So because we have a longitudinal data system, because we have built out the system for BKRP and for SOLs, it really, we can connect kids to classrooms very early on. Over time, we can then unlock tremendous information and insights about how those experiences shape kids' trajectories for success. We think this will be key, right? I think there are really two things in my perspective. One is to continually improving the system. And two, I think, is to changing mindsets about the importance of early childhood. And this is changing mindsets about the importance of early childhood, not just limited to classrooms and schools, right? Because right now we've got that data, right? We know which kids are in our BPI classrooms and how they do over time. But the difference here is understanding that that family child care experience also moves children, right? And helps prepare them that private child care experience, that Head Start experience provides tremendous growth over time and helps dispel some of those stereotypes about what does it mean to be early childhood care and education, and how can different programs support kids' learning development. So getting it at scale across all of our publicly funded settings is very important to kind of building the case for future investment, improving the system, and really elevating all of the different parts of the sector rather than just kids in schools. Sorry, question.
Yeah, thanks, Jen. So when you refer to classroom blitz, I assume we're talking child's first and last. Does it go any further than that? Or are we getting into dates of birth and where rural?
So we do need gender and date of birth and first, last name, and real initial. It is on the registration.
And then the parent opt-out part. So if you are at a publicly funded center, can a parent at that publicly funded center opt in?
Yeah, so there's the challenge will be whether the family themselves directly receives the public funding, right? So like if you receive a voucher or it's a mixed delivery classroom, that's a little trickier. We're still working through those details, but if you are not the recipient of a direct voucher or direct public assistance, you will be able to opt out. We'll have a form that you use and submit to us and make sure that that's part of the process.
We have families, so many different dynamics, so many different issues. Don't want family members to know where they are.
Yes. Yes. So, and we'll provide,
no,
absolutely. And we'll provide some information. We'll walk through all of the security mechanisms in place. I mean, basically, if that child is going to come to public school, like it's, like that we're going to really encourage you to give us that data, but we know that there will be some who are not necessarily going to come to public school and might have, for whatever personal reasons, very strong feelings about this. We'll provide guidance and the opt-out forms to centers.
Okay, thank you.
So like for a preschool setting in a school system, or is that will be pulled from somewhere and you said be done that?
Yeah, we already have that in the SR state. And the real part of that is actually driven this work, right? Because we do have the school data. We can tell you a lot more about what we know about sort of BPI, students who participate in BPI and what they experience, and it ends up distorting the perspective, right? And I think in some ways, inadvertently, we're sort of undervaluing sort of the power of Head Start and private childcare and family day homes. And so we're hopeful in getting this. We realize that some families will opt out, right? And we will work with folks to do that. We understand this will be a slight burden for centers and working for homes. They're thinking about how do we do that in a way, but we are hopeful if people understand over time what a difference this can make in terms of being able to kind of drive more investment, give better information, connect kids learning back to the things you're doing, particularly when there's not a lot of information out there about the impact, for example, of compensation on how kids are learning, right? The impact of some of these other pieces. A lot of it has been on like, is their bachelor's degree or not, right? And these other pieces, and we can really change the narrative and we can drive more support for the sector by doing this.
One more thing, do you know if DOE would have some kind of letter or something to help centers communicate?
Absolutely, that's a great idea. We talked about, we can do a your parent letter.
Yeah.
I was just gonna ask, with the reporting, I know we've even started where we will look at students in our VPR program. How are they now going in kindergarten? How are they doing in first grade? Will any of this reporting that you'll be able to collect be able to be shared back to centers and to divisions so that you can see as a center even look at the progress that our students are making that came to our.
That's a great point. I think we have the capacity to do that. That remains. I know we've had conversations with the Ready regions as well about how in a de-identified way that we begin to share that information. So we'll look at that. I know Link B5 reporting is something that's coming currently. Conversations that Tiara works very closely with the UVA team to sort of think through that. I also know we've had conversations with other research and higher education institutions around thinking about, again, always in state de-identified ways, how we can partner with folks to make sense of this information. It's a great point. Oh, you have a question?
Yeah, so looking at that chart, it says ECCE experiences. What does that mean?
So I think the key piece is sort of to understand like what are the factors associated with that, the kind of all of the different demographics of the classroom experience, right? So like right now, we can look at BLDS and say broadly, were you ever a participant on the Child Care Subsidy program, right? And then how do you do in third grade? But I don't actually know whether you were there as an infant, toddler, preschool. I don't know what the kind of classroom score was. I don't know what the degree of the teacher was, right? So it's trying to kind of get at more than just association with a site type or a funding source.
Okay, so is there any the VKRP piece of it? So there's no way that we're doing VKRP for free throats. So this data is not being connected. Like we're not as a entity able to see like, okay, some comparison of class scores, VKRP, ECC experiences. So this is sort of being kept separate from VKRP until they get to kindergarten. Because to me,
are you talking about VKRP or preschool VKRP?
I'm talking about the preschool, what we give them 3 and 4 year olds. I'm just looking at like this data could be really powerful for us to be able to link that into this and look at it.
Yeah, so we can look at it. So for students who have an ID, their ID will be the same in the VKRP system as it is in the VDOE system. So we can use their IDs to link. We can also do probabilistic matching because a lot of the same student data for VKRP as we do in Link 5 of the class data of the classroom. So we can do those linkages. The data doesn't live together right now. So it would be like the college system. We have to pull the data down and kind of do some matching and make a separate data set. And then the extent to which we'd be able to share that back from studies, we'll definitely have to kind of think about that. But we do have plans in the future to be able to make this more visible to people who take it in general, it's one of our main goals. So it's definitely possible. I also think it'll depend on the number of classrooms that infiltrate our rosters, and we'll definitely look at some point of DOE public.
Yeah, I would just, and I know some of this you're still developing it, but if there's any way we can make those connections, like I really hope that 5 years from now, I can get in the system and say, okay, look, this is how our kids are doing this. This is how they did a PKRP in kindergarten, and then the SOL test in third grade. Just because of the, I just think it would really be a good perspective, and it could impact them what we do with them, when we have them.
I think there's a kind of an analog and, like, slightly easier to use, but thinking through what the state has learned from regional longitudinal data system, right? And this idea of like, how do we handle, in a way that protects children's data, but handle if you want to kind of, as a program, request that information in the identified way, right? To sort of say, how could you make that query? How could we, because it won't necessarily all sit in the same place, but if we could, do it and with the non-technical service or connect on the back end and do that pull. So this could be useful to you all while protecting privacy. I think it's something we want to continue to work on and thinking through kind of what the right data governance is across these systems, right? And how the right privacy protections and but I think Virginia, we've had the opportunity of BLDS has gone first, and so it can be helpful in learning some of what has worked well and where there's been challenges.
The other thought is, sometimes it's not longitudinal data for our kids from the school division, so it could be thinking down the road if a center could have an agreement with the school division that you're getting it, non-identifiable, that could be a way to go with their house and that, because I think a lot of them share that data. My only other thing is reading from the document means EDOE must be able to monitor the growth and improvement of child outcomes in the classroom level, but I don't see class scores as a measure of growth and improvement of the children, but that's not what that means.
Oh, yeah, I guess our point is we would like, so we measured this directly in Louisiana. I mean, ultimately, a part of what we would want to be able to see with the data is the relationship between class scores and kids' growth over time, right? So for example, you should be able to look at the preschool BKRP, right? And sort of look at the sort of difference between fall and spring and then the relationship between the class scores and that growth. And then because you have some other factors, you can also control for that, right? Like you can control for the credential of the teacher, the compensation of the teacher. So it provides, I think, from our perspective, and we're still, just to be clear, are not in a place where we think it would be appropriate to require BKRP right now for preschool. We just know that our childcare and family childcare partners have a lot still, right? And the idea of sort of, mandating assessment feels too premature, but at least for those who are required to do it, to be able to kind of in one place and pull that data together.
The growth is really that preschool BKRP, but you're going to be able to see if you correlate right now because the class score of 700.
Yeah. And that's what we found, in Louisiana was we evaluated kids at the beginning of their 4-year-old year, and the kids who were in the classrooms scored higher grew more from fall to spring, right? And it's just really important at that time to be able to say both to elected officials and to programs, even though there are now sort of 200 plus national studies that show that, like everybody else is really applicable for my program and for my state. So that will allow us to sort of comply with that legal requirement. While I think hopefully beyond that, really getting kind of different information. I mean, we think that there's the information we're capturing about the workforce is just so important as we continue to grapple with what matters most in terms of being able to provide high quality interactions. And even the question on curriculum around what does it really mean to use it effectively over time and how, what did sort of the steps of that show? It just seems really important to have some information about which kids are in which classrooms.
So again, is there any way, as you guys are doing this, that we would see the data? You can't do it specific to somebody who we would be able to see the.
Oh yeah, and I think we'll continue. We do the data deep dive. We'll bring you all the data. No, rest assured. I think the bigger thing is going to be figuring out what are the right agreements and protections around the kind of the request, which is sort of BLDS. I mean, BLDS can sort of spit out anything statewide and share that, right? Because the end is big and nothing is identifiable. But I think that, yeah, absolutely, we will begin. The second we start getting this data, starting to sort of put that in and deep dives, and Chris and Tara will take it around state. But I think it's the only thing that will take a little bit of developmental work is like, what is the governance and the set of and practices around protecting kids' security. It's just really important to get that right.
Well, I want to thank you all. I do think this work is incredibly important. It's pretty impressive that we're going to get down there. I didn't already have about for it. Somebody's got a great dissertation.
Yeah, we continue to really, reaching out to, multiple, all of our public education institutions to encourage, anybody who wants to do a doctorate, it's our way. All right, let's move on to the next one. So required class list number 1. Number 2 is clarifying the guidance for the class tool selection. And this you'll find in section 4.2. So the simple way to say this is that we really continue to learn. And I just want to sort of do a special shout out to Cheryl and to Sandy and their colleagues on this one, is really figuring out. We've heard from many an educator and leader that, class articulates, right, the right set of educator practices and interactions and instruction you want to see. But it's important to get it right in terms of matching the right tool to the children in that classroom, and thinking both about chronological age, mix of ages, and developmental ages. So this is a highly nuanced section that I will probably call on Chris to explain more if I get any questions here. But basically saying, particularly for mixed age settings, our family day homes, and for our children with special needs, kind of providing additional clarity on which tool to use to better align with the needs of that classroom, and then making sure that we are consistent on which tool we select, so that using the same tool for fall to spring, so you can understand the growth or change, and also with the third party, because it does us no good if Vivian comes in and uses the toddler tool, and then Jennifer comes in behind her and uses the preschool tool, right? It's sort of apples to the oranges. This change will not affect most sites. For the vast majority of sites, this is sort of does not affect you at all. It really will. It's additional guidance for family day homes and for early childhood special education self-contained classrooms to provide additional sort of information, how to think through which is the tool that you want to select, right? And you'll select it, and then that'll be your tool for the year. And then that will help us by giving that guidance up front. We won't have a scenario where we've got using different tools, local and third party, or fall to spring. And a part of this, I think we've learned is particularly sort of using the toddler tool as an example, it's sometimes the most appropriate tool to use over the course of that time period. All right, you can go to the next slide. Here is the kind of the detail on that for both of those settings. So again, this is a very nuanced change, but important. I think it's really the area where we have grown the most around using the class has been with our sort of what I would call our unique, our special populations, and really wanting to make sure that our educators and our leaders feel like the tool is matched to the needs of the children in that classroom. So where the guidance said the toddler class tool should be used in mixed age family day homes, even where the sort of enrollment fluctuates throughout the year. And we just think this is a better resource than having a scenario where you use a preschool tool with 18-month-old and 2-year-olds, right, or an infant tool with 4-year-olds. So that the kind of the toddler tool represents the best possible compromise. And then for the early childhood special education self-contained classrooms, the toddler tool can be continue to be used, even though these are chronologically preschoolers, depending on the developmental age and the kind of the IEP situation that we work in. There's an approval process by the department. And in this last year, Chris and team and Dawn learned quite a bit from this, and we want to kind of continue to offer that flexibility so that sites, namely school sites, have that discretion depending on the kids in that classroom. There's been some of the feedback received. Otherwise, you're coming out there using a preschool tool, and it's not as appropriate as a toddler could be for what's going on in that particular classroom. That's a comment in the chat. Oh, yes,
I got you. The comments from Dr. Nelson. I think also important to understand how other factors impact school readiness, economic, home and food security, parenting, parental mental health, and trauma, etc.
Absolutely. That is a great point, Dr. Nelson. And one of the reasons that we capture more than just the first and last name is so that you could, and I'm going to mess this up, but basically probabilistically match, understand what their student testing indicator would be, and connect it to all the types of data that are in the Virginia longitudinal data system. So hold your breath. We got 20 years, right? Because we got to wait for all these guys to move through the system or more. It's hard to imagine. I'm going to say the data out loud, but the goal would be able to better understand, you know, and by connecting to VLDS, and by having that ability to probabilistically match, we can better understand some of those broader contextual factors, like socioeconomic status, like whether or not this is a family you know, that is receives, you know, health care or food assistance, right? Very, very important. Any questions about the class table selection?
I just want to hear clearly. So if in a class we have 16 children in the class, and we have 3 with IPs. So that means that we are allowed to request for the salary.
Do you want to answer that, or?
We would certainly look into it. There's a process where we look at how many of the children, kind of percentage of the overall classroom. So typically a self-contained classroom has a high number of children with a significant cognitive disability. There's kind of a criteria to determine that disability as well. So we could look at that situation. If it's just 3 in the classroom, that probably doesn't quite fit that definition of self-contained, but we certainly could look at the IEP needs and that determination.
So, question, so using the toddler tool for your assessment, how do we use that in the mixed delivery in the mixed age group classroom to show school readiness in that example, family day home environment? Because we're not touching, and I agree we should be consistent with using the same tool from spring to fall, but how do we also show that in that mixed age group that we're also touching those things that are needed for school readiness if we're only using the toddler tool?
Sure. So there's actually an alignment document that we can send as a follow-up that shows how a lot of the components of the engaged support for learning in the toddler class overlap with some of the similar pieces like quality of feedback in the pre-K. So some of the indicators get a little different based on the age, but there's actually a lot of consistency still on what's being observed within the toddler tool that overlaps. So we can definitely share that alignment because it would still support the preschool learning. It's not like those learning pieces wouldn't also be covered in interactions.
Okay. I think the other, I think the other point too, and you all are, we're learning so much in the family day comes about this, is sort of, you know, figuring out kind of what is covered, right? We want to be kind of consistent across the state, where depending on how many preschoolers you have, you might be using your curriculum differently, right? Because I would also understand that the curriculum would look different for the toddlers versus the preschoolers. And so trying to kind of find what is the best kind of way to measure consistently across the state, but then, you know, thinking about, okay, you know, there might be places where I go further with my preschoolers on some of the direct, you know, instructional pieces, right, using the kind of curriculum. So we'll continue to watch that, and that's probably why we're capturing the data, right, is to kind of understand how the different interaction practices then translate into greater school readiness. I think, generally speaking too, Cheryl, I think it's still, well, while we're kind of learning more, want to err on the side of avoiding the risk of having kids be subject to higher sort of expectations than makes sense for their age too, right? I mean, there's a pretty significant sensitivity about, you know, is kindergarten in the first grade, right? Is pre-K the new kindergarten, and are we somehow, you know, really 3-year-olds, right, on things. And so I think when we looked at, yes, it could mean there are places where you're going to go further in terms of the instructional components and your instructional related interactions, but I'd still rather have us err proceed across the board towards the sort of the safer middle and take a risk of saying we're trying to, you know, promote, advanced language development in a way that doesn't really make sense. I mean, you could ask an infant, how or why question, and sit there. But, 2 years, really come back to you, but, so that I think is the other piece as we sort of think about kind of striking that right balance, not going too far. And you all have just such a good job of thinking about the whole child, right, and the kind of developmental appropriateness. So we want to strike that right balance.
I think also takes time to do the NPs.
Yeah.
It's not just that you go and get it. Yeah. It takes at least 3 months to do it. So it's a process. And sometimes the class you have 2 with NPs, but then you have like 4 or 5 that they're going to be.
Yeah, and that's the type of information. So that why we have this approval process. I think what we found is more self-contained classrooms than we thought applied last year. But as we look through what they were sharing with us, this was the right thing to do for the kids in this classroom. So we will continue to do this. Okay, number 3 is expand support for score replacement. So this is in section 4.7. So one of the really critical things and kind of the guiding principles we agreed to, so we thought about how do you do this at scale for 3,000 sites and 12,000, 11,000 classrooms, thinking about how do we get to that right level of consistency and accuracy statewide. One of the things that we've done to really empower localities and site leaders and others is to provide tremendous flexibility on who can do a local observation and the parameters around that. On the flip side, I think that our elected officials, our board and others say, how do we know that there's the right level of consistency statewide? How can we know that whether you happen to be out in Norton or in Hampton Roads or in Nova, that, that these results, are credible and valuable because there's the right level of consistency, right? And we can sort of connect this to greater learning development for young children. So we had implemented, or in the process this year of implementing score replacement, and we have made tremendous progress in putting this in place. We've had lots of really important conversations with Ready Regions and site leaders and improvement partners and others. But what we have heard loud and clear from the field is a need for additional supports. And so kind of wanting to make sure that we are thinking about everything from how we name this process to how to better support Ready Regions, site leaders, improvement partners, and others around score replacement. So this is, we're kind of, got that protocol in place. We're going to walk you through the analysis. And what this means for next year is that we will continue, and I was thinking about your questions with Tina and Jennifer about what about, my information? And so kind of continuing to really, as I'll walk through the next couple slides, get more and more information to you about score replacement by region, age level, site type, program type, sharing that with Ready Regions in the field, making sure that we are increasing our support to Ready Regions around preparations and ongoing support of local observers, right? So that every observation is as consistent and accurate as possible, and really building out that local observer capacity. Some of you have heard me talk about this. It's not a number that is often revealed if you read any of the articles or the research that's done on Louisiana, but one of the data points that I was most proud of is that each year local observers, fewer scores were replaced, local observers got more and more accurate, right? And we think that was one of the biggest drivers of improvement, right? As folks had a very good understanding of what the different behaviors and practices look like, and were very well prepared to then support their educators, hire educators, train educators, do all of the things that our leaders do to support their classroom educators. And then we're going to look at developing resources, webinars, more information, more resources for site leaders who we've kind of heard from this fall in terms of what is this, how does this work, what does this mean for me, so that we're they're better supported as well. So let's take a moment to talk about this data. Next slide, please. So this is, as I said before, we primarily rely on local observations for the results for our measurement and improvement system. And we know that local feedback matters in terms of getting to all of our educators multiple times per year. We also have an obligation statewide to have a third party go in, right, for which all of those very high rules around conflict of interest and bias apply, so that we can say to those, you know, as the stewards of these taxpayer dollars, a significant investment, like, yes, this is a credible, consistent, and accurate system. So this gives you the numbers. They're sort of mind-boggling of observations, but basically in the fall, you see we completed just over 10,000 local observations and nearly 3,000 external observations done by Keystone. In the spring, we're expecting that same number, just over 10,000 local observations, and then we will go up to just over 5,000 third-party or external observations. This will give us a total into this year at just over 29,500 observations. So this is, I don't think anybody else in the country is doing this many observations. And what we want to do, and you should also know that many of the other places that use observation tools or use class only rely on external observations and a sample system. And one of the things that was guiding principle for us from the beginning was like every teacher, every classroom, twice a year, not kind of a one and done. So this is trying to sort of strike the balance between what are the criteria that are sort of accepted nationally as kind of rigorous, which is the external observations, and then how do we empower local observers and use that data to drive the majority of our system. That gives you the numbers. Next slide, please. So as you see, so this is an example of doing some fall data, and this is more around just kind of making sure that folks understand the importance of score replacement, and then sort of saying this is where we're kind of doubling down and sort of provide better resources here. So we had just about 2,700 classrooms had both observations, right? So we had way more observations done overall locally, but you know, roughly a quarter of those had both a local and an external observation. We saw that about half the time that there was score replacement in one or more domains, so fairly widespread. But that was generally speaking in only one domain. That was the majority of those. So we are not, I think there's a little bit of misunderstanding out there that if the third party comes in and there's a difference in one area, that we replace all of the score with the external. That's not true. Again, the vast majority of the results that will come out next spring will be the local results. We only substitute when it is significantly off by more than one, higher or lower. And so I think that's a really important field. Like it affected half the folks, but it wasn't all of their score. It was really a subset of their score. What we saw was that the emotional and behavioral domains tend to be very consistent, and instructional domains tend to be less consistent. And there's some up and there's some down, but that's the place where we end up in practice having different expectations, and we've been communicating that to educators, right? If we really want, back to Jennifer's point earlier about to support widespread improvements in learning, we've got to make sure that we're all sort of singing from the same sheet of music about what high quality instruction looks like across the toddler and preschool ages. So that's the kind of the key takeaway. Next slide, please. And of course, we got more data for you on that in case you didn't trust my high level takeaways. But this is what you see. So I have a couple of just analyses just to sort of show kind of what we know so far as you think about endorsing this part of the guidance. But so as we said before, a small subset, a quarter of the observation had the paired observations, and that there was some score replacement in just over half of those observations. In that, where there was score replacement, external scores were higher in about a third. So this is not just across the board. When the external observation is used, it brings the results down. A third of the time, it actually was higher than what the locals observed. And then again, across the board, about half the observations had no replacement whatsoever. What you see here is by age group: infant, toddler, and pre-K. And there's again just the paired observations here, right, which is where the external scored higher, right? So 49 of the infant classrooms is scored higher, and about 100 they scored lower. And then of those 280, they were consistent, right? So particularly in infant, we give it to be very, very accurate. Toddler, you'll see a sort of a similar pattern. Over 100, the external scored higher, 255, the external scored lower, and then over 300 observations, no change whatsoever. And so on. And so what you see is, again, although a certain, we can hit about half statewide, you also have half classrooms who pretty remarkably on different days and different times, like still scored kind of within that one point or the 2-point band, one higher, one lower.
Just by curiosity, is there a particular domain that tend to have the score replacement?
There is.
That was my guess.
That one
guess.
followed very closely by age support for learning and toddler. Those two are, by far. That was my absolutely. All right. Next slide, please. So we also looked at order of observations. So the national research on class suggests that there's, generally speaking, even when you observe the same classroom, different days, different behaviors. I feel like as there can be a lot going on in every school in a toddler classroom. It feels very different, but the data really suggests that there's not a tendency for classroom results. So I particularly want to account for the 4 cycles or the 3 cycles, right? Like, and we're often talking to you like, you can kind of fake it for like a cycle or two, but like once you hit like minute 45 or minute 75, like it's what's happening in that classroom. And we found that was pretty consistent too, that sort of the rate of score replacement did not seem to be affected by what happened first. This is an important one. Like sometimes you worry about gaming, do they sort of use the external what happens first and then sort of skew it? And what we see is that was not true for the roughly 2,700 paired observations. There was not necessarily a correlation with when that happened or which one happened first. And then you see we had a handful happened on the same day. And again, even on the same day. Now this is a very small n, so I don't want anybody to like take away from this chart, like, oh, on the same day, there was, twice as much score replacement as there was. So we'll never do the same day. But in the rare case for the 12 that we happen to be paired on the same day, what you see is they weren't necessarily more consistent just because they happened on the same day. All right, but a very small n, do not ascribe anything to that very small number. Okay, then we looked at time between observations. And again, this is just examples as we think about kind of all the ways to sort of factor for what might be driving difference results. You see, this looks at the kind of the average time, which is the same, right? Whether you had score replacement or you didn't have score replacement, and you see a pretty sort of significant difference in range, right? From just a few days up to 30 or 28 days. So we don't think there's a kind of a relationship between the days between observations from the same day up until different ones, but then the sort of the length of time seems to be the same, whether there was or was not. Next slide. Okay, so this is another one. And this is what this looks like is so. Again, small numbers here. 90% of the paired observations from the fall involve the same teachers. So again, right, so like for the most time, even though we know we have tremendous workforce shortages and challenges, at least for this fall, and the paired observations that we have, that it was the same teacher, whether that was in October or November or some permutation of that. But we didn't necessarily see significant differences when it involved different educators. I have no idea the why on this, right? I don't know, what that is about kind of the situation, but I just wanted to share with everybody that if you look at to sort of say, oh, all of the score replacement happening, what was it related to having different educators? That's not what our data shows us. That you sort of see, I mean, the sort of same way another way to think about that is you look at that score replaced column is that just amount is the same amount of time, right? So that following same educator is that you see, is just as frequent basically to have score replacement with the exact same educators as it was with different educators. Okay, so let me pause there because that was a lot of data on score replacement before we jump into improvement planning. But I think the high level takeaway is we think making this investment in external observations with all of the kind of the nationally accepted rules and regulations and kind of expectations around those observations, even though they're just a sample every year, is really important. We also know that there have been a lot of questions and concerns about it. And so we feel, an obligation to make sure that there are additional resources and supports laid out in the guidelines. And we showed you that data, and we are prepared to think about more broadly as we roll these guidelines out this spring and summer, how to help people better understand and in some ways dispel some of the myths, right? Oh, different teacher, different day, or if they came first, then I'm going to do badly, or if you have the same day, you're twice as likely to be or something. I'm just kidding. That was a false graceful end. But we want to make sure that people understand not only the why or why we need to have score replacement to ensure the accuracy and the consistency of the system statewide, but also that we are committed to using this information to help every single local observer be as consistent, drift as little and as accurate as possible. So you heard this from me. I did not pass the class observation the first time. I was very, very pregnant, very, very pissed at the time when it came back 76%, and I may have slammed my laptop down, but recovered and did. But I say all that to say it's not a foregone conclusion. It is not an indicator of one's goodness as a person, right? I mean, it is a practice, it is a tactical set of skills, and the data in Louisiana truly suggests at scale, if you can get observers, and they can look very different, right? They don't need to have a PhD in early childhood, right? But if we can get observers who deeply understand the tool, the practices, who are very good at observing all elements of the classroom, and to do that, if you can get thousands of observers like that statewide, that we think there's a direct relationship to really positive improvement. I think you've heard me talk about this before. I can't think of any more powerful intervention that I've seen to elementary school principals than getting them trained in class, right? And having them get accurate. You've heard me talk about this phenomenon before. What we found in Louisiana in the data was that all the elementary school principals were recertifying in August and observing in December, right? And what was happening? There was tremendous drift. And they would let us know, we are a very good principal. We, know this thing, right? I don't disagree with you, but you drifted, right? Because last time you trained on that field was in August, right? And so I think that trying to think through how do we continue to edify and support the field, even though I know it stings at first, right, in terms of score replacement, but really, really important. And we are prepared in partnership with Chris and Tiara and all of our Ready Regions and the Early Childhood Foundation to work with the field to kind of continue to do a better job supporting them as we go forward. Questions about that? And if you've got ideas on other numbers you want us to run on this and score replacement, you think about some of the concerns coming up locally, please let us know.
I'm just thinking, just a thought with this score replacement, internal observers, there's a lot of behaviors in the classrooms, and sometimes I wonder even with our own internal observers that when they're doing the class observation, sometimes they score what they know the teacher does instead of what they're actually seeing happen, or they're being considerate of the behaviors in the instructional support domain instead of where it belongs, which is in the emotional support domain. So I'm wondering if that has an impact on how internal observers are scoring because of the prior knowledge they have for the classroom.
Yeah. And that's something we can look at. I think, the thinking about that, we see that cuts both ways, where some people are somebody have higher expectations in their head and kind of come in and score lower, and then there's other places where there's almost a sympathy around, I know what you're going through in your personal life right now, and I'm scoring higher. So there's not the more we look at the data, the more we're struck by there's not necessarily, this is the one trend happening. It tends to be really about the observer and how do you support the whole system of observers.
Shaki, in your description, is that more so in the public school setting? Because we use the term internal, but at last site, it's already regional, but it's not an internal per se. And so
So we're, our Head Start is, under community action, so we're not in public school, but we just pulled our data and that's what we saw that was consistent, just got our, actually, this was our external, observations, just got off the press a couple of weeks ago. And so we looked at the class scores from the fall and the spring and looked at the increase in behavior with that period of time. And what we saw was that emotional support was maintained or maybe even increased. But there was a significant decrease in instructional support for this spring observation. And it was mainly because teachers were more focused on keeping the classroom safe.
Yeah.
Keeping the classroom safe, yeah.
I have a question or a thought, and I'm not sure how, but in looking at the data that was received, especially with the instructional piece, we know that there are several professional learnings that happen, whether it's a Virginia Head Start conference that may be going on, or just other types of settings. Are we looking at being able to ensure maybe there's some sessions, things that are also put in place there, not just around giving class, but actually that instructional domain, really being
Yeah, I think this has been the hardest part, right, about everything being private for the last 2 years, is that we've tried to be so very careful about kind of results. Even, I mean, we've seen, we only really do internal audiences, right? I mean, I can't even tell you the number of times I've had Keystone or other universities or folks say, could you just present how the state did, publicly, and I would just refuse, right? And so, but I think we will, and I think really we've been working, Chris and team have been working and Marie with the improvement partners to help them understand. I think we will continue to work with the associations. I was thinking about it. I great minds think alike. I was actually, when I was looking at all the BASIS sessions and sort of thinking about, does this right now match up with what we're seeing in the data? And it's not quite there, right? But that's mostly because we've been so private about it. But I think absolutely working with ready regions, with school divisions, with, Head Start grantees are always typically a little bit ahead of the game because they've been using class for so long in terms of thinking about how do you take this information and translate it into your professional development. And then I think we'll work particularly with schools too, around helping them make sure that the early childhood educators get early childhood specific rather than generic professional development. So that's a great point to have. And I think as we get public next fall, we'll be able to kind of be more transparent about that.
And one thing we've heard too is people want to see high quality instructional support more. And I think now that we can talk about the data, we can find where there are some examples. I don't think people see it as much, right? And so if we can highlight, and not just what it looks like in a public school, what does it look like in a child care center and a family, I think that would be great. So we're also going to try to capture Virginia examples of that better too.
Question, as we are moving forward with all of the changes, will there be an opportunity for maybe quarterly, statewide, whether it's on a webinar or some other form of training around class? Because as we have new teachers coming in, it's a lot on a director or owner to try and get that educator ready for the classroom observation that's going to happen 2 weeks after they step foot into the classroom. And they're still trying to learn the dynamics of the families that they're engaging with, the children and all of their big emotions. I can definitely see why the behavior piece took a greater lift, because if we can't get the structure and the routine, right, you can forget the instructional support, because with all the emotions that are going on in the classroom, safety is going to be at the top. So we're spending kind of more time in that area versus the instructional support piece. But as new educators are coming in, they need help in understanding that as well. And those tools.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think, we've certainly said we want to make sure we prioritize professional development for folks that are needing those support. I think there's a broader question, I think, about sort of around both the standards, sort of general kind of breakdown and sort of general interactions, right? I think there's a,
arguably, sort of being thoughtful about how we could get some general information about sort of what high quality interactions look like, how it's different across an infant, toddler, and a preschool classroom, and thinking about how to kind of get that, I think that readily available. The biggest challenge we see is sort of figuring out how to make that work for everybody. We still see very low numbers of participation in kind of in-person training, even though we know that's preferred, and we're trying to kind of figure out, maybe it's more recorded modules, maybe it's more videos that sort of show what kind of high quality practices look like, sort of figuring out kind of what are the best ways to then help newer educators understand and begin to do those practices. I will say the other thing that we've heard, and I just read a research study about this separately related to math, no less, but is that it's an interesting thing about human learning, and sometimes we almost learn more from the kind of the specific feedback. Like you can watch a video on interactions, but it really sort of, there's some more learning might happen if you get that kind of individual feedback. And so figuring out, I don't want your educators to go in there cold, but I also think probably the volume of class observations that we do does help our newer educators, even if it's a little lower than they'd like to be, right, at first blush, but that is maybe better than sitting them through like 6 hours of like watching others, right, do it. But it's an important one. Sure, we'll take that, and I'll take that back, and Bree and Aaron, I can look at that. And we're also thinking about some of the pre-service training and kind of how do we better modularize things and put them out there for you all to consume, so that you say, hey, now that we have a provisional license, you're now hired provisionally, watch this video, practice this thing. So it's very helpful advice.
Of course, I like for educators in the public school system, they think it's evaluation. There's such a difference. So you have to sort of say, it's not that, so you do have to sort of preface them a little about what it means.
Yes,
versus this evaluation. I'm like, I don't do your evaluation.
Yes.
I'm just here to,
to do this.
to help you to grow. So that it's a little different with the.
No, that's true. Absolutely. All right. So speaking of professional development and support, so the next section is around just a small but very significant shift. And I'll ask Aaron or Lucy to answer questions here if we get into details. But one of the values that is really important is thinking about where there are programs in need of support. And although the law talks about kind of consequences, what we really want to focus on is prioritizing these programs for support. That said, as somebody who has visited sites that score very low on interactions, it's concerning, right? We just know, and I want to just acknowledge nobody in this room. I never had a low performer apply for advisory committee, but these are places, right, where we have public dollars going, where vulnerable kids are being served, and we have an obligation, right, to say you've got to improve what kids are experiencing. And oftentimes, as Jeff and his team knows, you unravel a set of issues, right? Of like, teachers who don't know what they're doing, teachers who are overwhelmed, there's a flat out, there's a set of things going on, behaviors that the adults are finding challenging or it can't be dealt with. And so we think it's really important. We had a practice run of this year in terms of last year's guideline says that folks who were low scoring would be invited from the practice year 2 would be invited to participate in site improvement planning. And what we see is that some did, but some also didn't. And we think it's important that we require anybody who receives the result of need support to participate in site improvement planning. That is, quote unquote, the only kind of consequence that we're proposing at this point in time is we want to work very closely and carefully with the field. What that means is that we would work with these sites that score in this range. They'd have to work with a quality consultant, right? They'd have to let that person in and engage with them. They complete a needs assessment and a quality improvement plan. They have more frequent in-person and virtual kind of checkpoints. And that they would be the priority for coaching services through a new kind of competitive process that that's currently underway, with the goal being like If you are in need of support, we are coming to you. We are telling you we're cordially invited, but you will participate. But we're also saying we're going to get you the support you need, right? We're going to get you folks who can come to your site and offer, virtually the kind of coaching you need. You go to the next slide, please. This is also something that we happened upon, and Aaron led this work when we were in Louisiana, and we saw really positive results. That there's just typically, again, and you all know this, I say this all the time to our stakeholders and elected officials, like nobody comes into this work to do a bad job with kids, right? I mean, if people, there's lots of easier ways to sort of to make money and do a bad job. So that's just not happening, right? What's really happening is folks are just dealing with a lot or overwhelmed or have something going on. And so a part of what we try to do is require this so we can get you to take it seriously in the same way that, we require you to get a license to take health and safety seriously, require it, and then really work side by side with you to understand first what's going on, develop a customized plan for you. This is not cookie cutter when I think about kind of the sites that face the most difficult challenges, and then to really keep checking in with you, noting that probably some of what's going on there has to do with, a lack of being able to kind of work yourself out of that solely alone. And then we would look to kind of close that out. We've drafted these tools. We go to the next slide, Leah, here. We've got these if you want to look at them or offer feedback on them, but basically just a very simple form to kind of understand more about what's going on your site, customize. It's not cookie cutter. Who are you? What do you know about your interaction scores? What do you know about curriculum? We shared this data last year, right? None of our sites or all of our sites, that receive need support, none of them are using any type of curriculum, right? And so that's just, again, we were going to start with sort of trying to push curriculum on them, right? But was more on just this awareness of, that there's a lot of things going on here. And then your site leader reflections. I really tried to engage them as a site leader, whether that's a center or a family day home. If we go to the next slide, we then have a copy of the quality improvement plan. It's very simple, just a very simple process to meet folks where they're at and to help promote improvement, with the idea being like, we're not going to change everything overnight, right? We're not going to roll out curriculum, have you apply it with fidelity, hire a highly experienced teacher, have everybody meet the most effective interaction, but that's not going to happen, right? We're going to sort of say, what are the 3 things that are most important to kind of help improve interactions in your setting, and like how do we focus in on that, right? If there's something else related to health and safety that might get in there too, and we'll work very closely with our subsidy partners and our health and safety partners to make sure we're kind of looking at the whole picture here. But really, sort of a small number of reasonable goals is what we're trying to achieve here. And with that, I think just to jump back for one slide, Leah, I think the key thing here is, what does it mean to be required, right? So what it really means is that we will go through we'll take multiple steps with all banks to get to you, to tell you this is important, to explain the why, but then say you really have to do it. There will not be consequences, as you see the guidelines, for not making enough progress, right? The goal is, if you are trying, if you are legitimately participating and trying, we will recognize that. The only place in which we are having to have a very difficult conversation with the site is if they are refusing to open their doors, refusing to respond to the quality consultant, right? Refusing to show up for any of whatever the sort of trainings or things they agreed upon. The reason we have them work with us through the plan, this is not a mandate from us, right? Like, go to this training, do this. It is to come up with a plan that they think will work for them, they think is doable, right? And then to really follow up, so you committed to this, right? It does us, no good if we don't come up with something that really works for them. The same way that we work so diligently with educators to help say, do you believe these are the right interactions for kids, right? And they'll say, yes, we do. So we want you to come up with the goals that you think will make the biggest difference in terms of improving interactions. And there only becomes kind of more serious consequences for refusal to participate. If you don't achieve your goals, right, we'll come back, we'll revisit, we'll figure out how we continue to support you. There won't be kind of a quote unquote like financial penalty or sanction. The goal here is to be part of the process, learn from the process, align our supports to prioritize these programs, and ultimately put them on a different trajectory. And that's kind of what we've added as the requirement for this year. But again, there's not that's the hope is that everybody participates and we don't have to have any kind of consequences beyond that.
Are they observed? Do they go through the class of observations fall in spring while they're acting?
Yeah, so some of that.
What would be the consequences if someone chose not to participate?
Yeah, so it would be, Holly, it'd be similar to the consequences if you didn't register, right? So we'll sort of send you, we'll first sort of say you need to participate. We then send you like the first letter saying like, hey, do go from like, you'll see this is kind of a friendly form. We go to our less friendly letterhead letter. That's it's like you need to engage or pick up the phone or do whatever else, right? To do this. And then if that still goes on, then we have to give like we go up to like 3 letters where we say you have 7 days after this date. Right now, and then it changes a little bit about funding source. Right now, the programs that are included would all be subsidy programs. And so if multiple letters and efforts, I mean, we do not want to remove your voucher that has a negative effect on kids. We gotta figure out where we go send those kids, right? So our goal would be to get to you, but at some point, if you absolutely refused, we would shut your subsidy case down and help those kids go to another location in that community. If it involved a Head Start or a school, we then go to the funding authority. So we would reach out to the regional office and say, can you please ask this Head Start to, participate in this process aligned, all the kind of Head Start performance standards or quality improvement. They need to follow state law, please help us engage this Head Start. And the same would be with the superintendent. So I don't foresee it happening, but the goal would be to follow a kind of a pathway that's similar to what happens if you don't register. And hopefully we would not ever get to that point. And I don't think we ever did in Louisiana. Most of what we found was the programs that score in this range are ultimately appreciative of the additional hands-on support in a way that they were just not prepared to ask for. The one thing we will also continue to look at here, and I'll just flag this for this group, we feel it is only appropriate to require for those programs where we can all agree need support. I will say we as a group in our planning around this have recognized that there's a handful of sites that are only above the need support cutoff because they happen to be using curriculum. And so thinking about, do we make some of these resources available? How do we continue to prioritize those sites, right? Because I think, apples to apples, when you look at their interaction scores, we're a little concerned about what kids are experiencing. And so again, we're not going to require it for anybody, right? Need support is the cutoff, but I think we're going to think about taking some of these processes and resources and engaging a little bit more broadly. And again, that would be totally optional. So I don't want, that could involve, I will say, some Head Starts in some schools that are, but again, totally optional. And often that tends to, for Head Starts in schools, be cases where there's been change in leadership or there's not those kind of things around. Okay, number 5. Almost good here, I think. So really just the time. Okay, so the release of the public quality profiles. So this is the last, but certainly not least part of the puzzle here, but really making sure as required to get this information out for families. And so what this specifically means is how do we put the information from the profiles, which has previously been this letter to programs, out on a public website, right? I think the kind of analog here, although we're going to take a different approach, it will be a entirely separate website as the school quality profiles, right? So it's got a site out there and you can go there and you can search for whatever school division or elementary school or middle school or high school that's out there. So we have to kind of put, for everybody's participating in EP5, that information online. So that'll be the biggest shift, right, from the previous practice years to this fall. And we're working very closely with the team, with partners across the state to kind of, engage you every step of the way. Our sites will also receive a certificate with their quality rating if they want to display. You don't have to put it up. It's not like your letter grade for your health and safety or whatever they have with the restaurants, right? You don't have to put it out there. If you want to, you can. It's totally optional. We have heard from people that they really like certificates. And so if you want to put a certificate up, We're still figuring out the logo and all of that. There's a lot of feelings there involved, but there will be a certificate. And I think importantly, we tried to practice the last few years is data verification in that process. So it's not a surprise. It's not like we're going to call you on September 15th and be like, open this and see what it looks like. Boom, it's out there. No, we will engage. Here's your data. There's the score replacement results. Here's what the profile will look like. And I think Superintendent Walker is quite familiar with this. We try to make sure that there's, by the time it actually goes online, that all of you are very familiar with what your site profile would look like. Next slide, please. So, and all the feelings, we've got lots of feelings on words and pictures, and that's totally okay. We are putting mock-ups like this out there and available. Let us know what you like. I'm trying a very simple site, right? That give you a kind of micro site, and this is what the kind of information would look like. And so again, this is a starting point. We are sharing with lots and lots of stakeholders. This is continuing to evolve as we go. And so I'll turn it to here in a second. We'll talk about kind of survey information, but we go to the next slide. We're in the engagement stage right now. So sort of meeting with families, meeting with ready regions, meeting with program leaders, meeting with family day homes, or improvement cards, or so we'll be at basics that are saying, what do you like? What don't you like? What would you change? Looking at the kind of the content, how the search function might work, what you can download, right, for your site, some of the features, the overall look and feel, and then we're collecting feedback through lots of different ways. There will be, Cheryl won't be on class, but we will give you a webinar, okay, this quarter, March 19th. And again, just trying to socialize this as much as possible with generic information right before we hit late summer, and you're looking at it with your own site in mind. With that, Terry, do you want to talk about how people can give you some feedback now?
So hopefully everybody can see. So I think it's the last piece in your packet. So what we have here are actual mock-ups, both plain and annotated. And for folks online, this is on the website already in one PDF. I think it's called website drafts. And for folks here too, if you'd like to look at that, to like zoom in and give us even bigger, feel free. So the first page is just kind of directions on what we would like for you to do. So in a little bit of framing, talks about these being the mock-ups for the homepage and for the quality profiles. And there's a QR code that will bring you to a survey that will let you tell us what you think. So we kept it pretty open. We want as much of your opinions, kind of thoughts, your likes, your dislikes, concerns, suggestions, all of those things. And you can put that in the survey. We did include a question that says if you would like for someone to follow up with you, then you can provide your name, and obviously you can do that. But if you want to keep it anonymous, that's also totally fine. This link is very specific for Ecac, so please don't share out. We want to be able to track all of our feedback and make sure that we know what groups we hit and are represented in our feedback. So if you could use this for yourself, that would be great.
And if they have, like, they want to take it to a bunch of teachers or families on their site, you get a question for you. Yes. Just email only, and we'll get you that if you want that.
So the first couple of pages are heavily annotated. You see tons of red boxes. And the intent here is just to help frame things. I think it got a little bit cut off when we printed. So definitely take a look at the virtual copy as well. But all of the red boxes just kind of give you some information. Since this is not a dynamic website, it's hard to know like what these links will actually lead to. So red boxes are just framing information. And then as you move to the profiles, we've included several examples here. So we tried to get every site type. We also got every rating in here. We weren't able to get super specific just because we also have to build out the actual website, and that's where we'll have some of these CSC examples, we'll have these delivery and that kind of thing. But you should see, I think there's 6 examples of quality profiles for each rating system or each rating category and in each site type. The green boxes have things that we would like for you to think about as you move through this. So does the order of the information and that kind of grayed out bar, does that make sense so that you can understand And then once you get past the annotated version, then you will see versions that have no boxes in case you would like to look at this uninterrupted. The boxes kind of cover things that are all false.
It's true, if you're like, something like an exciting night plan.
So take a look, and then again, it's a little cut off at the bottom, but this is version 10, so we've been working on this for quite some time. And so there will be a point in time where we engage you all again. So we talk to other family day home providers, we talk to private centers, Head Start. We might be on version 12. We might be on 11. So just keep in mind that this is what it looks like. This is version 10 as of February 29th. I think that's it.
And so like Tira said, the materials are online, but they also should have been emailed to all of you. So you've got that combined PDF in your email as well.
Yeah, and Chris made a good point. So, like I said, this QR code is very specific to the feedback form. We're also working on our broader feedback form. And so, the way that we've opted to do that is to do a little bit more characteristic information. So we'll ask people to kind of check all of the five. Are you a public school? Are you a family member? Are you a board member for a community organization? So they will see that version. Will also ask for ready regions in that, as well as people affiliated with them to know which one they're physically located in, what kind of level are you at. So we'll make sure that we have that information, and then their feedback form will be a little bit more guided with some open-ended questions as well. So that will have a linear scale, strongly disagree, strongly agree about different aspects, so that we can get some quantitative data to bring back to you all as well to say, 90% of people agree that this was understandable. But then we will also have a new text box where they can tell us all of their thoughts, opinions, if they love the colors, so that's how we will do engagement outside of this meeting.
Those be ready to provide their information for the webinar. That's kind of our kickoff to get off. There's the broader, out there feedback.
And we don't have a deadline for closing the Ecac form right now. The general feedback form we want to wrap up by May 10th. So if you all could give us feedback before May 10th, that would be great. But we'll keep it open. I'm seeing that last day and make sure it's a reminder.
All right, thank you, Tara. Thank you, Chris. So again, webinar on the 19th. Statewide, everybody's invited to sit on that. We want to get your feedback. We thought it maybe not, you want to go page by page because continuous figure out. We've done that before, but we do. I think it's sort of useful to kind of go back and take a look at it. But we invite all of your feedback, what you like, what you would change. It's been a very iterative process, and we'll continue to be so through the fall. But we really. We want this to have, even though it's a requirement of the law, we want this to have utility for providers. So those are the kind of the 5 shifts in the guidelines, right? So 1 is the requirement of the completion of class list. 2, and this won't affect most sites, but the kind of clarification of the selection of the class tool, which particularly pertains to some of our family day homes and early childhood special education inclusionary classrooms, self-contained classrooms. 3 is the importance of providing additional support through school replacement. 4 was the shift from an optional improvement planning for need support sites to required improvement planning in a very thoughtful, individualized, supportive way. And 5, which is what Tara just took us through, which is everybody get ready, that we're still taking feedback, as we think about the requirement to post online these results come fall.
So one more thing I forgot to mention, all of the data on the profiles are fake. So there is not really anything out there. Yeah.
There really is one.
So please just know that it's fake, and everything that we put out in the field will always be fake data. Absolutely.
That is a good point. Okay, so let's talk about next steps here. So just so we're all oriented, I know we've gotten into the weeds for the last hour or so. So Hopefully today we get your endorsement on the 24-25 guidelines. At the same time, we have the board working this month and do the first review of the new regulatory action. That's what Chris brought to you all last month, although it was really just 2 weeks ago. That's just the high level kind of regulatory apparatus here. And then, as Chris and Tara just described, really intensive engagement on what these kind of online public site for the quality profiles will look like. In April, we'll do a statewide webinar on the guidelines. The board will do its first review of the guidelines, and we'll do the second review of the NORA. The spring observation window, I cannot believe we can say this out loud, closes May 31st, and all of the curriculum information by May 31st. We're going to wrap up our first full year of implementation. Next slide, please. We then go to June. We take hopefully we get full approval of the 24-25 guidelines at the June board meeting. We will, actually we'll probably be at the May meeting because we're not meeting in June now, but the Ecac, we'll walk through kind of what feedback we've gotten prior to the May meeting. That's why we need all that feedback by May 10th. And then we will need to finalize that quality profile. We will then start to crunch some serious numbers, taking all the data for 23-24 year, begin to calculate all of the site quality ratings. We will begin data verification in July. This is a very careful process of making sure that each site across our 3,400 sites sees their data, verifies that their data, right? Make sure there's no surprises here, and then finalize the profile, the website. And then August, it's hard to believe it, kick off year 2. The registration begins on August 15th, and then we're still figuring out dates. It'll depend probably on number crunching and technology builds, but aiming for something around the time of the release of the school quality profiles. And we're not going to promise that in year 1. We want to make sure we get all the steps right and folks have sufficient time to engage their superintendent if needed, to engage their site leaders, all the kind of the steps that are needed. So we're not committing to a specific date yet, but wanting to make sure we get through verification. There's an opportunity for you to see the information in embargo fashion first, and then a go live date.
Is there a plan, just for now, but some information to be provided to media so they understand in case they up on the story and
Yeah, that's a great question. I think we should sort of map this out. I know that Chris is here. I looked at what we did for school quality profiles and steps. We've been more focused right now on final steps, but we will need to at some point think about normally, my guess is it will be a press release, right? And that kind of information. And then I think the real thing we'll be thinking about, to the extent that many regions are interested in terms of promoting kind of equipping them to do that too.
it might not be in school divisions have a luxury of departments.
Yeah.
Let's say a center doesn't do well in the media, so we're gonna call them and talk to them.
Yeah.
Like talking points could be helpful for
No, absolutely. And again, I think really focusing on
everything's great.
on the bright spots. No, I think that's right. And also wanting to kind of get out through certificates, folks, feel very good about meeting expectations. All right. Any questions about the next steps?
Yeah, with the profiles, I know, there'll be ones on the VDOE's website, but will there be a requirement for center sites, schools, to then have a link that drives from their own website to them?
There will not be at this time. I mean, what we've seen is quite a bit of variability in what whether sites have websites or not. And so again, there's no requirement. You don't have to post the certificate. You don't have to link to the website. It's really up to you. I think we as a body will continue to talk about, once people feel more comfortable with it, are there more intentional things that we want to do to promote? So one of the things that we created over time, not immediately, but over time in Louisiana, was this idea of honor rolls, right? And kind of really elevating some of the work of folks who were doing very good work with infants and toddlers, right? Who were made the most improvement in prior years. So I think, you know, we're very open to thinking about different ways to highlight this. I think our goal for the first year was to make sure that nobody was surprised and people could get comfortable with it. And then I imagine we'll come back to this body and, you know, sort of say, all right, what else might we want to do to elevate this work? You know, and we're very open to different ideas about that. All right, if there are not any additional questions, if we could get an endorsement with recommended changes on these.
Right. So yes, first, are there any recommended changes? I think we had great discussion on all 5 components. Are there any specific recommendations for change? If not, do we have a motion to endorse?
We endorse the proposed guidelines as presented today.
Motion has been made and seconded. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Yes, second. Yes. Any opposed? Ayes have it, motion's carried. All right, thank you guys. This is so exciting. I'm getting excited. Okay, I know, I probably short days, so I'm excited. Okay. All right. As you can tell, this is one of my favorite things to talk about. So, but out of respect, and I know we've got a little bit of time, but we'd love to get some time back. Let us turn it over to Becca for public comment, and then we'll turn it back to Ms. Franklin for adjournment.
So we don't have any members of the public here today, so that we received one written public comment that we will share with you all in full. So I'll just provide a quick summary. It was a lengthy comment, so I won't read it in its entirety. The comment was from a director of a licensed child day center in the Charlottesville area, who shared concerns about the content of the required pre-service training that Jenna mentioned in comments earlier, specifically related to the length, the accuracy, the applicability of the content for the Virginia context. So she's encouraging the Ecac to closely review this training and urging the department to consider an alternative vendor. The comment mentions proposed legislation that is we are expecting to become enacted, requiring DOE to evaluate and revise the training to make it more provider friendly and accessible. And so we'll work closely with all of you in this endeavor, and we'll keep the public updated on that process as well.
Yeah, that's it. Thank you, Becca, for sharing that. I appreciate that director contributing that comment. So it was House Bill 1024, sponsored by Delegate Will, that has asked us to take a look at the pre-service training and think about, I think it started as a concern about age applicability and having after school educators being extensively trained on diapering. Not who doesn't know about diapering, but in all seriousness, I think it's a good source of feedback for Jeff and ourselves and the team, and thinking about how we might pull a group of folks together and really take a look at what we like, what we changed, how you might sort of modularize this, what other content might need to be added. And so we'll work to pull together a group to do some version of that and figure out again how we would then work with the vendor to make those changes. And a complete sort of coincidence, we've been reminded as state employees all the required training we have to do, much of which is online and as many hours as the coincidence, okay, not causational, but it is a healthy reminder. I'm really sort of, every once in a while you gotta dust it off, take a look at it. You will come to this body and ask for volunteers and sort of really sort of saying, hey, this is in 2024 for my educators, what works well, this is what doesn't, this is what missing, and then we can work to make some pretty significant shifts. do the research training based on that.
Can I add to that comment on the JLARC report that was released in October? Gave 17 recommendations, and I think that was recommendations for 14.
It was, yes.
Us to take.
Yeah, so we've actually been thinking about since JLAR came out, and then Delegate Wilt, wanted to, make sure that we were codifying that and making that happen. So, and we said we were strong support of this bill. I think it makes sense to, we're hearing from folks, this is not working for you and for your educators. We want to make changes to make it work better for your educators.
Is that something that one of the college lab schools could be tasked with doing?
Yeah, just, this process is run by a contract that DSS has. So in terms of pivoting, so over the past 2 years since it's come over here, we've done a lot with the 3-hour updates. So that's kind of where our main focus was, because it was kind of low-hanging fruit. So the contract has to be renewed. We're going to do 1 more year, just from a timing standpoint. There's no way we could do a request for proposal. So it's a legal contract, it's a procurement process. Anybody who's done that knows it's no less than 6 to 12 months. But we are very much focused on that, getting a lot of information. With the Procurement Act, if you contract with a public college, there are some ways to work with it that you don't have to do the prolonged procurement. There's still some competition and things that we have to think about. Most of the staff that did this were at DSS, so we're still learning this process and maybe getting a fresh look at it.
So I think what we imagine are just bringing folks together, kicking the tires, and then there's probably phase 1 and phase 2, right? Like what sort of immediate, what things can we make, and then more broadly, as we think about the recomposition of this, we look to a very different partner and it might look very different.
One point of clarity, the numbers in the public comment are not correct about us paying $1 million a year. Just y'all know that's not what we're
Very
doing.
good, that is true, that's all right.
Before we close out, are there any comments on
Anything in the chat, I'll leave
in the chat?
Oh, just
Aye.
Voting to endorse.
Thank you for your endorsement. All right, are there any other questions, comments, or concerns for the good of the Ecac? If not, do we have a motion to adjourn? No, y'all okay?
Motion.
Clark made a motion. Okay. On to Virginia, second. All those in favor say aye. Any opposed? Ayes have it, motion carried. Thank you all so much. Please remember to do the survey by tomorrow so that our midnight is confirmed. All right, thank you.